I suppose it's my very great pleasure to bring a motion in relation to animal welfare today. Unfortunately, animal welfare doesn't get the time that it deserves in these two houses, and we wanted to make sure before the summer recess that we address a couple of very urgent issues as we see them as the Green Party, and I'm delighted to be seconded by my Fianna Fáil colleague Eugene Murphy here as well today. I'm going to lay out precisely what the motion is. There's quite a lot in the motion. For the Green Party, we went into the programme for government negotiations with a lot of requests in relation to animal welfare. While we achieved a lot, I think it's fair to say that there are other things that we wish we had got over the line, and regardless of which party we had gone into programme for government negotiations with, it was going to be a challenge, having looked across all of the manifestos of all of the individual parties. I'm delighted that we got a Minister for State in the Department of Agriculture, who I know Minister Hackett will speak later, and I know that she will push for everything that she can in relation to animal welfare. We did have a doubling of funding for the organisations involved in the area, and obviously I speak to these organisations all of the time, as indeed does Minister Hackett, and we try wherever we can to bring to the table issues concerning them, and I think that this motion does address a huge amount of those. So I suppose there's four kind of key areas. One is about live exports, one is about greyhound funding, racing, one is about exotic pets, and the other one then is about the welfare of dogs, and I know Senator Boylan will probably speak later. We've supported her bill in this motion as well, and we'd love to see this progressed, and we'll do what we can in order to make that happen. Firstly, I'd just like to speak about the issue around live export, and I've spoken in this House many times around the issue of live export. I don't think that it is an issue that most parties have agreed with us on. To be fair, it is the Green Party policy to ban all live export outside of the EU, and that's on the grounds that animals are sentient beings. Animals are put on ships for sometimes days, actually going to almost 2 weeks in some cases, particularly where there are storms, and that's what I've spoken about in the Seanad previously. When you're going to the EU, it's a very, very short trip. I've actually spoken to someone yesterday, one of the Green Party researchers, who said that when she went on her holidays with her children, there were actually 4 container loads of animals going with them on the ship. And what most people don't realise is that on those ships there are no vets, and that there's no requirement to have vets on board. So you have, particularly when it comes to very young, unweaned calves, they're on a ship for nearly 2 weeks, in some cases when they're going to some parts of, we'll say, for instance, Libya, nearly 2 weeks, and they have no access to any kind of medical care whatsoever. Many die on board, and when they get there, they go to systems of slaughter, because that's what happens at the far side. They're slaughtered, which don't do anything that we would think is humane in our country. So they're going to different kind of legislative environments, and we can't control that. And that's primarily the reason that the Green Party say we don't want to see these animals going on these long journeys. But at the very least, if you ensure that they had enough water, they had enough food, and they had access to even the minimal standards of medical care, we could stand over it. And it's just not possible to stand over that at the moment, when there's no legal requirement to have a vet on board. During the pandemic, many of these export companies said, well, we can't do it because we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're not in the middle of a pandemic now. Even if we were, in a pandemic, maybe you shouldn't have been exporting in the first place. So part of this motion does call to have vets on board every ship. And I know that there's no legislative basis, but I would ask that Minister McConalogue bring forward the legislation, because I think from my reading of the chamber here, everybody would support that. They might not support a ban on live export, but I know that they would support care for animals, because I think that that's something that Irish people do concern themselves with. So I'm just going to go through a couple of the figures in relation to live export. In 2020, we had 491,000, nearly 492,000 pigs exported from this country. Cattle, we had 265,000 exported from this country. And this year, to date, and we're only half the way through, in relation to cattle, we have 206,000. So we're on our way to have a bumper year of live export. And it is incumbent now on the export companies and on this House and indeed the Dáil to make sure that the legislation is in place so that that vast number of animals are cared for properly when it comes to going overseas. The majority of animals, as I've said, they are pigs. So I've specifically mentioned, and our Green Party group has specifically mentioned pigs in that. But when it comes to cattle, most are very young. They're unweaned calves when it comes to cattle. And if anybody here, and I've spent a lot of time on farms, if anybody here has heard the crying of a baby calf when it's been taken from its mother, it is very, very distressing. And you hear that, and we've certainly had that reported to us from our animal welfare group within the Green Party, which is incredibly active, does huge work, and I know engages with the ministers. You can hear that actually from the dock when it comes to these animals being taken and being put onto ships, and it's incredibly distressing. Greyhounds then, I'll move on to because my time is going to be limited, but when it comes to greyhounds, greyhound racing in this country, many say it's on its knees. It's on its knees because people don't want to go anymore. There's in Galway we have a track. Nobody who works there full time, as far as I'm aware. Maybe one or two, but there's a really small job opportunity within the greyhound racing industry, and that's often what's brought to this chamber is, oh well, it brings jobs to rural Ireland. No, it doesn't really. There's a few part-time jobs, but we have record numbers of employment. This isn't the time to be saying, well, let's put the jobs of probably about 30 people who could actually be in another, in another job opportunity. Let's put them ahead actually of the welfare of these animals, because there have been numerous exposés when it comes to greyhounds in this country. There's about 6,000 dogs, we've said it over and over again, that have gone missing in the country. They're born, they're not for racing, and so they just go missing. And apart from that, we have about 6,000 dogs that are exported to Ireland at a cost, exported to the UK predominantly. The cost of rearing these animals is taken up by the state. We actually pay for it. All of the money that goes into rearing these animals is done by the state, nearly 5,000 per dog. And each of those breeders, when they sell the animal, they pocket the money. That's about 1,000. I wouldn't love farmers all over the country love to have their animals reared by the state, all of the costs, and then they pocket the money for selling them overseas. This can't continue. All of that funding is coming from the state, and the way our legislation is set up is that every time we increase funding to horse racing, which I think we do need to do, we also increase funding to the greyhound industry. It's a 80%, 20% split. So in the middle of the pandemic, we had to obviously support the dogs and the horses who were really in our care because we've been supporting them financially. We had to increase the amount of money going to them. And we had to see that same kind of split through the budget, which was really upsetting for me as a Green Party member, but also it was really upsetting to really have it laid out there in front of us that this is the way that our funding is going. But I think one really positive thing in, I think it's 2016, Minister, is that in 2016, there were requirements that both industries prepare a strategic plan and make reasonable efforts to implement it. And the Minister himself has powers to withhold monies if the plans are considered deficient or if reasonable progress on the implementation of those plans has not been made. So it's quite simple, and it's something, again, I know that some of our members and some of those involved in animal welfare organisations have brought to light that actually they're not sticking to their plans. You know? And if they're not sticking to their plans, there's actually legislative grounds to withhold monies. So what we're calling for is an examination of the plans and whether they're sticking to them. And it's not for me to say whether they are or they aren't, but I think, you know, I think that there's a reasonable enough amount of evidence at this stage that they're not. And so we ask that, that following the strategic plan examination, that then the Minister makes a decision as to whether it is or it is not appropriate to give over that money. We, again, in the Green Party, would love to see an end to all public finances being used in the greyhound industry, off the back of some of that evidence that I pointed to earlier. I don't think that actually there's any party probably in this House who agrees entirely with leaving aside all funding. But we have to deal with the reality of where we are politically, and this, I think, is a really good step and a really important part of the motion. Look, you know, many have said we need to take a racing-centric breeding model, and it's hard for me to argue that when I don't really believe in greyhound racing in the first place. But if we did take that, and we actually said, let's take that kind of model, then we would put the welfare of these animals first. When it comes then to exotic pets, which again we've mentioned in this motion, this motion is calling on the Minister to regulate the breeding, the ownership, the sale and the supply of exotic pets. And it's taken directly from the programme for government. We don't know in Ireland how many, where or what species of exotic pets are in Ireland. Northern Ireland does have legislation in this area, and it would be welcome if there was consistency across the island. Because I think that what we tend to say is that we'd love to see some of our legislation in relation to the environment adopted in the north of Ireland, and particularly after Brexit, where we have real concerns. But in this particular instance, we'd love to see what they have in the north of Ireland adopted here. And it just does show that the public want this. I think the public really are crying out for the support of animals in Ireland. So not having any of this data, any information about these exotic pets means that there's animal welfare issues. Often wild animals are caged and they're kept in unknown conditions. And when exotic animals escape, there's a public health issue. Crucially, when it comes to biodiversity, and the first motion we ever brought to the Seanad when we got elected, and we have 4 Green Party senators, was to bring forward a motion on biodiversity. So much, I think, is a debate lacking that real proper discussion about biodiversity. We actually have seen that these exotic species wreak havoc on our local natural environments. Very hard to deal with then from a public purse point of view, but also when it comes to really restoring biodiversity and our native species. Now, many of you will remember my outbursts in relation to fur farming and the fur farming bill and ending mink farming on this island here a few months ago. I was frustrated at the lack of progress of that bill, and it was adjourned many times, and I was delighted to see that pass. And indeed, you had your own really important work there in relation to small-scale forestry on farms and land across the country. But upon looking into it, Minister, and I think that Minister Hackett is aware of this as well, and I think that this is why it's crucially important for us, is that piece of legislation hasn't been commenced. So it's passed both houses, and the piece of legislation hasn't been commenced. And this is why it was critical to have this done before recess. We need it commenced. I don't care what's going on in the background, really. There's 3 farmers who, you know, did invest heavily in it, but there's 3 farmers who have known for 2 decades that this industry doesn't have a future. The bill, which we've all agreed to, act now, should I say, needs to be commenced so that we can get on with the business of compensating those farmers and that the small number of workers, but critically ending fur farming, which has been shown not to be humane in any way, shape or form, not to be in the public interest. It's been banned in other parts of the world. Ireland's lagging behind. And I thought the job was done. You know, I did think the job was done. We've got the Act done. But now it's time to commence that Act, Minister. So look, I'm going to end it there. I've taken a considerable amount of time because I do feel very, very passionate about this issue. And I look forward to one of my government colleagues who I know supports animal welfare seconding this motion today. Thank you.
Are you seconding the motion?
Yes, I will second the motion, and I want to welcome the Minister and also thank my colleagues for being here. Senator Boyhan, if you listen to me, you might hear what I have to say, rather than comment before I say it. But anyhow, I know you have a big interest in agriculture as well. Look at Fianna Fáil have decided to support this motion, but can I make it clear at the start, coming from an agricultural background, and the significance of agriculture and our export market, I cannot support any call to ban the live exports. But I will say I understand where you come from, and certainly in relation to more veterinary care, a veterinary on board these ships, I'm all for that type of thing, because we have seen some incidents which were really upsetting, of particularly, young calves being sent abroad and, suffering on board. So I think every member of this House, and again, coming from a rural area and from a small farming background area, nothing hurts the farming community as much as to see those images on TV. I would say actually in relation to the farming community, again when you talk about the small and medium farmers, they really get upset, annoyed by this, because they love their animals, they love their animals and they look after their animals. And how children, whether from an urban background or rural background, when they see a young lamb, a young calf, a pup, whatever it is, they have huge respect and huge empathy, and we all have to have a very responsible level. So the motion calls on the government to work on several areas of animal welfare, including commencing the ban on fur farming legislation as outlined in the Animal Health and Welfare and Forestry Miscellaneous Provisions Act 2022, regulating for exotic pet species and increasing funding for the enforcement of animal welfare regulations, and to review the sentencing regime under the Animal Health and Welfare Act 2013. And I would say again, in relation to fur farming, I think we've all agreed that we've moved that on, and we do need to get the legislation. And I know the Minister is committed to working on that. I think the issue of compensation, I think it's maybe worked out or is nearly there at an end, and once we've that done, we should move very quickly with that legislation, because we don't want fur farming. That's the reality. Irish people have a very strong sense of empathy and responsibility towards animals, and our priorities in government must reflect this. And we're part of a three-party coalition. There's a programme for government, and I respect that programme for government, and I'll work with it. Animal welfare is a high priority for government, and considerable resources and funding are provided to organisations involved in rescuing and rehoming animals. And I think it should be recalled that in December 2021, the government, through Minister McConlough and others in the department, including the new Minister, provided record funding of €3.7 million to 98 animal welfare bodies throughout the country. And I take my own area for Common Galway, of people who are rescuing different types of animals, looking after them, make sure they're okay. They were all actually, delighted that this is beginning to happen in society. People who voluntarily look after animals and get very distressed when they see them being neglected, maybe dying, not lack of food. We have a responsibility in that regard, and we must do it. So that funding is very important, and I think there will be increased funding in that area. I'm very happy to say there will be increased funding in that area in the new budget. Work is underway to establish regulations for the ownership, sale and supply of exotic pets. And I agree with Senator O'Reilly here. We need to regulate that area without delay. And I think people get quite worried when the authorities find 10, 12, 14, 20 exotic pets have been brought into the country illegally. And there is welfare issues, there is health issues, and this must be regulated as a matter of priority matter. Now, animal welfare is a high priority for the Minister, who has made concrete proposals in regard to areas raised in today's P&V. For example, the Minister created the department's first standalone animal welfare division and launched Ireland's first dedicated animal welfare strategy, Working Together for Animal Welfare 2021 to 25, a new advisory council on companion animal welfare, a group of independent experts who will advise the Minister on important issues such as responsibility, pet ownership and certain breeds has also been created. The Minister reformed the Farm Animal Welfare Advisory Council, and he recently launched, with his government colleagues, the Farm and Animal Welfare Network, which focuses on practical, individual support for people and their animals at local level. Later this year, the largest ever allocation of grants to animal welfare organisations, enabling them to engage not only in helping animals in need today, but in education programmes that will prevent welfare problems arising tomorrow, will be allocated by the Minister and his colleagues in the Department. The Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine are working with other government departments to put in place regulations for the ownership, sale and supply of exotic pets, and the Minister is working on legislation aimed at further clamping down on those who dock or crop dogs' ears, another terrible practice. The Minister reiterated his continued commitment to upholding high standards of animal welfare in the transport of live animals, and I spoke about that at the start. Because of the economic importance of that sector to our country, and I mean food now, and the production of food has become all so important again with the war we're having. But I fully endorse anything we can do to ensure that all animals that are being exported are properly looked after, and certainly have veterinary support on board, because I think that's important. So, look, there are my few comments on it. I think animal welfare matters to a lot of people, whether they're urban or rural, and a lot of farmers. And certainly I think there's a lot of good in the motion. That's why we support it, as I said, we're part of the government. And I know you understand that in relation to live exports, because of my background in that, I would not like to see the ban on live exports, but I respect your view. Again, in relation to greyhounds, there are some very good people who look after their dogs very well, take them out or exercise them, but there has been people who have sullied that business very badly, and we must ensure that the proper thing is done and that animals are properly looked after. So, and as I said, I second the motion.
Senator Victor Boyhan.
Thank you, Cahill. First, I want to welcome the Minister here, and I want to thank the Greens for putting animal welfare on the agenda. I say at the very outset, I am the son of a cattle dealer. I have brothers who are involved in trading cattle. I know the potential, as you do, Minister, with responsibility in this area, of the importance of exporting of cattle. And let's be clear here of this, the difference between what the contribution from the Leader of the Greens has said in her statement and read into the record here. And I'll tease out some of it, and I can't tease it out all, but that isn't all reflected in the motion. So let's be clear, there are 9 calls. This motion calls on the government for 9 calls, and call number 1 is legislate for a minimum requirement. So let's be clear, if we're sending a message out to the Green Party Animal Welfare Group, I know many of them, they're colleagues of mine, they're friends of mine, we may have different opinions, not too many. So let's be clear that today's motion put down by the Green Party says legislate for a minimum requirement of all shipping carrying live animal export to third countries. Doesn't say call on, this Green motion is not calling on this House or the government to ban live exports of cattle outside the European Union. I think that's a really, really important point. But I also recognise you're a pragmatist, and you've said that yourself, and you have to work within the confines of a coalition government. So but I think that's a really important point. You are not calling today in this motion, which you have the option to do, for the live export, the banning of live exports outside the European Union. I think we need to look at other issues. I, of course, would have concerns about live exports of cattle anywhere within the Union or outside the Union myself, but I think they have to be based, we have to be pragmatic. We live in an economy, we have jobs. Someone was talking about calves ball, and I'm long enough around to know where I heard women and mothers bawling when their sons and daughters had to emigrate for jobs. I just want to set the context. There are many heartbreaks on the harbour walls of our nation, and I think it's important in the context of this debate. I favour veterinary technicians. I'm not too sure if we can afford vets going, highly paid professional vets, but qualified veterinary technicians is an option. So I think that's important. I think we need to look at the lairage scheme. We need to look at the lairage down in Wexford. We need to see where cattle are coming in and out in various ports within the European Union and where they're resting off. We need to talk about the age of them. They're not all young. There are many cattle that go outside of the European Union to be finished. They're not all slaughtered. It's not correct to say that they're all going to be slaughtered. They're simply not doing it. And I think that's an important point as well. I want to acknowledge, of course, and I think it's only fair and right that we do so, that the programme for government committed to double funding allocated to animal welfare organisations over a 2-year period, based on the 2020 budget allocation of approximately 2.4 million. Savings in the agricultural department were looked at, and eventually that went up to 3.2 million. And 110 organisations in 2020 received funding. The list is here. Indeed, I circulated it across the country at the time, and I checked with our committee yesterday, and it's there. So, I actually firmly believe it wouldn't have happened as much if the Greens weren't there. So I want to acknowledge that. It's a really important point. So I think that's to be fair to the Minister. But I want to single out Minister McConlogue. He has done an excellent job. He's the one that engages with us on the committee. He's come to the committee, and he is a strong advocate, indeed as yourself, but Minister Conlogue has come to the fore in terms of working together on the animal welfare. It's he that comes to the committee, he that answers most of the questions on it, and indeed his Ministers for State clearly are committed to it. Sorry, it is he that comes to the committee and engages with us, and I'm on the committee, and that's what I want to say. So I'm saying I want to acknowledge that. So I think that's an important point. I also want to acknowledge the animal welfare advocates as public representatives, and I particularly want to single out Councillor Tanya Doyle from Fine Gael, Councillor Deirdre Heaney, Councillor James Chariot, Deputy Holly Kearns, Deputy Gino Harris, and indeed our own Senator Boylan, who have been really strong advocates across the different political groups in advocating strongly for animal welfare, way beyond. They've given a lot of focus, they've given a lot of attention. And if you look at, and again, I took the time to look at the PQs and the commencement matters, and they have a commitment. So what am I saying? Look, I support the concept of having this debate. I think we need to look at areas, how can we mainstream, and if you look at the document, Minister, which you would be familiar with, Working Together for Animal Welfare 2021 to 2025, one of the key issues is mainstream animal welfare across all Teagasc training. So I think that's an area we need to do. And they're all commitments in government, and I accept them. But just to be clear, and I will finish on this point, that we have to be balanced in our approach. I support animal welfare, but we are in an economy. And just finally to touch on the issue of that indeed Senator Pauline raised, was the issue of the mink. I'm somewhat surprised that it wasn't, because I too thought it was all rolled out. But you're in government, and that's an issue for the government. And the government have a programme, and I presume they deliver on the programme, and I presume you have monitoring of your programme, and I presume you look at that. So it is a surprise, but I will make contact after this meeting, after we meet here, with those groups that are engaged with us. I will make contact again with the Minister, and I'd ask you, Minister Hackett, if you could shed some light on what steps you took or people within your department took to pursue it. Is there an issue here? Is there a difficulty with implementing government policy and ultimately an act passed by the Houses of the Oireachtas? Thank you.
Or Tim Lombard.
Great to be here in this last day of Seanad. I think this is a very important motion. I think it gives us the opportunity to debate where we are in the agricultural sector regarding animal health, and particularly the issues pertaining to the motion that's been written here this morning. And I think if you look at what the farming community have done dramatically over the last 2 or 3 decades, there's been huge changes in practices, huge changes in education. And I think there's a huge need for that education to continue. And I've often spoken about things like our age profile of our farming community. They're over a certain demographic, and how we engage them is very important. And one of the key issues how we engage them is something called discussion groups. And I think that has proven to be very successful in trying to get the information out there. So what are discussion groups? Basically, a group of farmers that meet once a month on a farm and go over practices. And it's training on a farm on a continuous basis. And I think that is a really important part of how we can get that education brought into the system. We've had a debate here this morning, and we've used figures about live exports, but I think we need to bring clarity to those figures in particular, and maybe the Minister might clarify. Minister, there was a figure of 400,000 pigs mentioned as an export in the chamber here this morning. You might clarify on your own department website that over 375,000 of those went to Northern Ireland for slaughter. They didn't leave the island. So even though they're down as exports, they didn't go in near any ship. So I do think you need to clarify to make sure that the wrong message doesn't go out there from your department here this morning. This issue about live calves unweaned being moved, you might elaborate on the 13-hour limit regarding feeding and how that is tied in. That is a really important statistic, and that piece of information, again, is on your website. So those issues need to be clarified, because the general public might get the idea that, unweaned calves are spending weeks on a boat, not 13 hours. And I think that's a really significant figure. And we also might get the idea that hundreds of thousands of pigs are being sent abroad and they're not even leaving the island. So what's exports and what's moving off the island needs to be clarified for the debate itself. And I also think we need to clarify, Minister, the actual work of the committee, which I'm Vice Chairman of, and the amount of work they've done, in particularly to the greyhound industry. And we've had some really tough meetings with them over the last few years. And the changes. And Minister, in your own response, you might acknowledge the actual tracing issue that has emerged and how that has now been enacted by the actual greyhound industry. How the traceability issue now has been brought forward, somewhat following on the agricultural bovine system of tracing every animal. And I also think, like on my working committee, and I have members here who know more about, in particular, the exotic animals issues than I do, there is a significant deficit there. And I think other members will probably speak on that, which have greater knowledge. But there is a need for work to be done regarding that issue. And particularly to the dog issue, and I think, again, does other people in this chamber have a greater knowledge of that issue here? There is significant work to be done there. And I think if you look at the hearings we had in the committee in the last 6 or 8 months, to be perfectly honest, it's been a learning experience for myself as well. And I think, politics aside, there is great knowledge in this chamber, and we need to bring forward real recommendations and legislation about those issues. But I do think this issue about getting the right information out of this debate per your website, per the department, is important, Minister. So I'm looking forward to your response, so you might clarify the figures that were mentioned, just to make sure that they're not misleading this House. Thank you, Chair.
Lynn Boylan.
Thanks, Chair, and I hope maybe you might give me a bit of leniency, because there's a lot I want to say.
Take 2 or 10 minutes.
And look, I want to welcome the motion and thank Senator O'Reilly for bringing it. I think animal welfare is a really, really important issue, and it doesn't receive the attention that it deserves. Part of that is that it falls across a number of different departments, particularly the canine welfare. And I was very pleased that the Agriculture Committee, in fairness to them, agreed to my proposal for post-enactment scrutiny of the animal welfare legislation. And we had very lengthy hearings on issues of dog and horse welfare, and I hope that work will continue with the support of the other members of that committee to look at the issues like around with exotic species and things like that. And I would like to acknowledge the increase in funding for animal welfare organisations, but I think the critical thing is we have to stop the flow. We have too many animal welfare organisations, to be honest, and that's because there's a need. And, you know, Dogs Trust said there was a 73% increase in surrenders this year. And when I went to visit the new county dog pound in Dublin, they said that 30% of surrenders were as a result of landlords not accepting. So the housing crisis is actually even having an impact on animal welfare, because people have no option but to give up their pet in order to get rental accommodation. And that means that children are missing out on that really important experience of having a pet as they grow up. I would like to, I suppose, focus particularly on the issues of dogs, and while I think there is a lot in the motion, there's also a lot that could go into it, and maybe we could work together in terms of progressing some of the issues that I particularly want to see progress. So the issue of microchipping, that legislation was very welcome, but again, it's not been fully enforced. We need a central database, Minister. That has to happen, and all of the data that is required in the legislation has to be implemented. So we know FIDO runs a very, very good database, and does require that all of the information about the animal, the breed, the age, all of that is put into the database, but there are other databases that are not collecting that information, and they should be. Also, the online sale and supply of pets, it's no good telling people to shop around. when they don't have all the information. So we need the pre-verification system, which is very cheap. Again, it's being used by Fido and Dogs.ie. That needs to be mandatory. We also need local authorities to publish the dog breeding establishment lists in a standard format with the number of breeding bitches and the number of inspections that are carried out, so that people can decide, look up the dog breeding licence number and decide whether or not they want to buy a dog from somewhere that keeps hundreds of breeding bitches. We need the DBE guidelines to be reformed, strengthened, but also to put on a legislative footing. And we also need a national inspectorate, because local authorities, the standard of inspections of puppy farms is just, it's all over the place. And we had the Department of Rural Affairs into the Agriculture Committee, and I have to say my jaw was on the floor listening to them. They haven't got a grasp on this issue at all around the dog breeding. Surgical artificial insemination is happening. It's a barbaric practice. It originally was just in the greyhound industry. It's now made its way into companion pets as well. Canine fertility clinics are popping up all over the country. There's literally no legislation to address them. People are setting up canine fertility clinics with no veterinary training whatsoever, carrying out surgical artificial insemination, carrying out caesarean sections with no veterinary training. Cropped ears, again, we need changes to the legislation, including a phased ban on the ownership of dogs with cropped ears, because that has lifelong issues for the animal. And something else that's going to become an increasing issue is the cost of veterinary care. And the Blue Cross do fantastic work on this, and I know the DSPCA also have a low-cost veterinary van that goes around. But people are having to hand over their dogs because they can't afford the veterinary care. And we have to look at how we can support people to be able to keep their pets. And also some of that is linked to the fact that we have these designer breeds that come with all the multiple health issues. And I'd like to thank Senator O'Reilly for referencing the bill that the Seanad did pass around the closing of the loophole and just aligning the Control of Dogs Act with the Animal Health and Welfare Act, so that when puppies are seized at ports or in illegal dog breeding establishments, or under those really horrific conditions that we see regularly in the newspapers, that those animals can be rehomed within 5 days and not have to be kept for the duration of a court process. The other issue as well is that we need the Gardaí to have an animal welfare unit. It's not standard practice. Animal welfare organisations are going down to Templemore, and they're doing that voluntarily and training Gardaí around what their obligations are in enforcing the law. But that needs to be standardised, and we need to have animal welfare units, because what you'll hear is in certain Garda stations you'll have a particular guard who's interested in the issue, but that's not across the board, and it makes a huge difference. In terms of equine, again, breeding of horses is a problem, proper grazing facilities for urban horses, strengthening of the passport system. Just on exotic pets, I have to say, and I welcome that there's a call in to deal with exotic pets, but in May this year at the European Council meeting of Agri-Fish, 19 EU member states voiced enthusiastic support for an EU-wide positive list system, and Ireland didn't open their mouth. Now, I had Minister McConaughey in here. I asked him before he went out to that meeting. I asked the department what was their position on it, and they didn't have one. And it turns out that they didn't make any vocal support for that positive list. And I think that's really deeply disappointing. And Minister, I hope you take that back to your government colleagues, because we do need to have legislation on exotic pets. And finally, just I'll use the last few minutes, I promised, around greyhounds. Look, I don't like greyhound racing, and I've been very honest about that. And I've been honest with the committee and with the greyhound industry when they come into the committee. But I do think, and it's a little bit like what Senator O'Reilly was saying about live exports, we can certainly tighten up the regulation. We need vets at every trial, whether they're unofficial trials or official trials. That has to be standard. It's the law in Britain. It should be the minimum here. And again, I was really disappointed. Minister McConaughey, when I put it to him in committee, basically referred to say, well, it's like the difference between playing for your county and playing for your parish, that you'll have better facilities and physio when you're playing for county. I'm sorry, like, greyhounds don't make a choice about racing, so the bare minimum they should have is vets anytime they're running on a course. The other thing is the surgical artificial insemination is rampant in the greyhound industry, again, banned in Britain. The Veterinary Council of Ireland, I would call on them to call for a ban on this, because and then the overbreeding of greyhounds. We need a cap on the number of greyhounds that are bred. That's the reality, because we are overbreeding them. They're going missing in their thousands, and those that don't make the cut in Ireland are then being sent at a below cost selling to Britain, and we're funding that. The taxpayer is funding all of that. And final thing, just to also call on Minister, just if you would consider, and I had Minister Noonan in here on this, and he's been really supportive, rodenticide and metaldehyde. We need a ban on metaldehyde for domestic use. You should not be able to buy slug pellets in discount stores. Whatever about the agriculture and working with farmers to phase it out, I shouldn't be able to walk in, nobody in this house should be able to just walk in and buy that because of the devastating impact it has on pets but also on wildlife. And then rodenticide and the impact that that's having on bats, or not on bats, sorry, on raptors. But again, it shouldn't be available to the general public. So I'll leave it there.
Seanad or any Hoey.
Thank you. You might consider giving me the same latitude. Thank you so much, Ceann Comhairle, and thank you to the Green Party. I want to commend my colleagues for bringing this issue to the Chamber during their private members today. There are a significant number of issues in this motion that I feel very strongly about, and I would like to speak to, as I have in my past 2 years in this Chamber: the treatment of animals in the racing sector, the need to better fund our animal welfare organisations, the care and standard in need of improvement in our agri-food sector. And while this motion is extremely comprehensive, I did notice that there is a gap in one area of animal welfare matters in Ireland. The motion does not mention the 7 zoos or wildlife parks that we have in this country, which are responsible for the care and preservation of rare and endangered animals, and we assume they are a guaranteed safe space for animals. However, it has been my great misfortune over the past couple of months to learn that that is not so, and that is not always a guarantee. The motion brought forward today discusses that animals are entitled to the widely acknowledged 5 freedoms reflected in the Convention: freedom from hunger and thirst, discomfort, pain, injury and disease, to express normal behaviour, and fear from freedom and distress. And I'm going to outline some concerning breaches of these freedoms. A number of months ago, I began a series of meetings with both former and current staff members in Dublin Zoo. Through this engagement, I've been made aware of a number of breaches of these freedoms for animals in Dublin Zoo, the most detailed accounts of which have recently been issued to me by a whistleblower via protected disclosure. Regarding the animal welfare management failings in Dublin Zoo, I've been told by the whistleblower that there's been serious welfare issues, near misses, safety and management concerns at Dublin Zoo. Because I have exhausted all options with Dublin Zoo grievance procedures which fail to act on my concerns, I feel I have no option but to expose my experiences of what I have witnessed in the zoo. In the motion before us today, there is reference to animals' rights freedom from pain, injury and disease. And I want to tell you about Kildare, a zebra who was not free from that freedom. A female zebra, Kildare, died after complications during a tooth extraction procedure on the 2nd of the 12th, 2020. She was darted twice and suffered from capsular myopathy. She was kept alive even though staff requested the animal be euthanised. The tooth was extracted and the animal was severely paralysed when she came around from the anaesthetic. The animal was left to recover overnight. After no change, the animal was going to be hung overnight in a harness, even though she was severely paralysed. One staff member pleaded at the end of the 2nd day to end the animal's suffering. Management and veterinary team were planning to leave her hanging in the harness overnight, despite being severely paralysed. Staff were extremely distraught after witnessing the zebra's treatment, and they felt they could not raise concerns for fear of reprisals. Kildare was featured on the Zoo TV series on the 26th of the 6th, 2022. In the motion before us today, there is reference to animals' freedom from pain, injury and disease. And I want to tell you about Maeve the giraffe, who died only last month. Staff were informed at a meeting by a team leader in March that Maeve was on watch, meaning that she'd be on quality of life assessment. Maeve has not been observed consistently or been assessed to determine her quality of life, and there was no quality of life assessment filled out from March until her death on the 28th of 6th, 2022, where staff had to watch her lay and slowly die while kicking out trying to gain her footing. This should never have happened to Maeve or her keepers. After her death and post-mortem, staff were called to a meeting and offered counselling, and then told to delete any videos of Maeve and how she died. And this is another attempt by Dublin Zoo to intimidate and conceal the wrongdoing and animal welfare problems. And before Maeve's death, I saw photos of her gaunt frame and her bones sticking out, and she was clearly an extremely unwell animal. In the motion before us today, there is reference to animals' right to freedom from pain, injury and disease. And I want to tell you about Harry, the silverback gorilla. And I think we all know about Harry, as he was one of the most famous attractions in the zoo all throughout my childhood and into recent times. Harry was a silverback male gorilla that died on the 29th of 5th, 2016. Keepers consistently raised concerns leading up to his death. There's reported daily reports that his behaviour was abnormal, he was losing weight and his condition. Keepers repeatedly asked for a vet to examine him, and eventually a vet was called and he died shortly after. This has had an adverse effect on the rest of the troop. This is one of the hardest stories for me to hear from the many staff I spoke to, as the pain in their voice over how Harry was treated in the run-up to his death was unbearable. And I sanitise the details here, as I don't think I could read all of them out. But I saw the photos of Harry at the end, and he suffered greatly. I have seen footage and photographs of the animals I've mentioned here today, and the visible and necessary suffering they were left to endure is unfathomable. And Tom McCree, Brista. This is not what care and compassion for animals is supposed to look like. This is not the standard of care which we as members of the public and of the Parliament have come to expect from Dublin Zoo, a much trusted and beloved public institute. However, the pain of sick and dying animals are not the only animal welfare issues that were detailed to me in the protected disclosure and from the former and current staff I have spoken to. There is a major breach of guidelines happening in the form of missing animals. In the motion before us today, there is reference to animals' freedom from fear and distress. In November 2019, 2 crested macaws went missing and were presumed dead. In February and March of this year, a white-collared mangabey went missing, also presumed dead. Despite staff raising the issue of them not being found, management have not looked thoroughly for these animals or raised the public's awareness in the event the member of the public were to encounter it. Staff raised their concerns of the 2 missing macaws, saying there were 24, but now there are only 22 in the group. The team leader quotes the creator saying, "But there was always 22," insisting that the keepers could not count to 24. A Crichton-crested cockatoo escaped on the 21st of 5th, 2022 from its aviary. This is a critically endangered species, and since its escape, there have been no efforts to locate the animal or raise the public's awareness if they were to see such a bird in the hope of being able to return it to the zoo. The zoo has failed to follow any protocols to either retrieve the animals or inform or warn the public to either retrieve the animal or to prevent anyone sustaining an injury from one of the missing animals. And I'm nearly done. What I've raised today is only a snapshot of the stories which have been shared to me about the failings in animal welfare in Dublin Zoo. I have pages and pages and pages of testimony from both current and former staff, and I was on the phone until very, very late last night hearing more stories that I don't have time to go through today. These events are not in the far past, they are also happening quite recently. I've outlined some very recent breaches. I want to thank all of those who have taken the time to speak with me and inform me of these issues over the past number of months, and I particularly want to commend the whistleblower who had the bravery to come forward with their protected disclosure to me and trusting me to help share a light on these most serious breaches of animal welfare in Dublin Zoo. These are people who have come forward, who care deeply for the animals they care for, and who have put themselves in the firing line and work to raise these concerns. And it is a pity that their voices, the only one the animals in their care have fallen on deaf ears. In closing, I feel it's only appropriate to quote the whistleblower once again when they say, "I have exhausted all of my options to date, and I can't in good conscience wait till my serious misgivings result in the death of a colleague, and as is already happening, the unnecessary deaths and mishandling of endangered animal species within Dublin Zoo." So I want to thank the Greens for bringing this motion forward, and I hope I've raised a light or shone a light on something that is extraordinarily serious, and I will be engaging with the relevant minister, the relevant department and the relevant committees in the days coming forward on behalf of the whistleblower on this issue, but I wanted to tell it here first. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and the issues you outlined are very serious, and I do hope that the appropriate authorities from the Department of Agriculture all the way to the Garda Síochána take what you have said on board here today, and given the use of privilege, which is what it's there to do, it's there to make sure that you and others who can raise issues of great concern to the public are free to do so, and that the press are free then to report what you have outlined, and hopefully change will come as a result. Thank you, Senator. Anish, Seanad or Dolan.
Just to acknowledge, I suppose, Senator Hoey's contribution. I know it's very heartfelt, and I look forward to, as you said, Ciarán that we get an update on that as well from the relevant agencies. I want to thank Minister Pippa Hackett for being with us here today. I suppose to speak with us on the on this particular motion. I know from our colleagues. You know, it's working together for animal welfare, Ireland's animal welfare strategy. And I suppose, you know, when we look at this new welfare strategy that we've seen here from 2021 to 2025 is so welcome, you know, and it's great to see all stakeholders coming together about how we really look after animals here in Ireland. I suppose I come from a farming family, and I grew up where, you know, you were looking after sick calves. We're usually in the kitchen or we were bringing lambs in. My mum was a nurse, and I must admit that looking after the calves, the cattle that we had, came number one. And I know that it is something for an awful lot of farmers that, that they would look after their cattle, and that, they're bringing out vets, and the cost of bringing out vets, and yet farming families do that because they want to ensure that their cattle are being looked after. So I just know that for a lot of families there is a lot of pride in making sure that their animals are looked after well. And I suppose I might just also point to funding that just came out this week as well for agricultural shows, where it points to best in show, like for different types of animals. So there's a lot of pride there in rural communities about bringing, the best in quality to so many towns and villages around Ireland. I know that as Senator Lombard was stating, there's so much there now as well with farmers in terms of practices and training and discussion groups and how best to manage. And we've spoken here about the 5 freedoms for animals. There's a lot of supports, I think, that have been put in place. There's a lot more sort of, as we know, like education and training, particularly through our colleges. I know, like in Mount Bellew Agricultural College now, part of the ATU, that's really, really crucial. And I know that there's an awful lot of assistance that's needed. I know that when we've had fodder shortages, farmers across the country come to each other's aid in making sure that areas that are impacted with loss of fodder, loss of feed, will be supported. It's really crucial, of course, that we've seen the fodder scheme coming in, because again, that's looking to potential shortages that we might see later on in the year. Because of the impacts of the war in Ukraine. So it's incredible that global situations have such an impact when it comes to us trying to plan ahead as well as a government, and through the Department of Agriculture as well in the time ahead. Minister, I know Senator Lombard is just asking for clarity just on a few of the figures there that were given, and hopefully that you might be able to just shed some light on that. I think it's really important to acknowledge that Ireland is at the forefront in terms of agriculture. I mean, the area, particularly in the west of Ireland, like you're looking at grass-fed beef, like you're looking at animals that are outdoors. You're looking at slatted sheds where, you're trying to protect the environment, but also ensure that animals have, safe spaces as well. And I think it's absolutely crucial that we see that farmers are, and that we as a country are supporting the welfare of animals. And I'm speaking specifically, I suppose, just from a farming perspective, but that it is a livelihood as well. And that livelihood is about supporting our communities in rural areas. And that can't happen without having a livelihood. So in other words, income that comes from a farm. And to be able to support our farmers to do that, that means supporting, the idea of marketing animals, being able to sell where there is a demand. And we know that there is a demand in countries for quality animals. And Ireland does stand tall in terms of the quality of its animals, its beef and its cattle. And, the welfare that has been put in place, like, the restrictions now in terms of live exports, the care that has to be taken, the fact that there's veterinary inspections on nearly 90% of animals that are exported, at ports, also at marts around the country. That marts are working together with officials from the Department of Agriculture to ensure that best practice has been done in all areas. If I might also just speak to the fact that, live exports, I suppose, is something that we do need to ensure is protected, but that it's done to the best, to the highest quality, the highest level possible. And I suppose just that what I would see in this motion is that we are looking to support our farming families and understand that livelihoods are at stake here. Livelihoods in keeping our communities in our towns and villages alive across this country, and that we're working together to see how we do that best, working with our farming families. I suppose just to maybe just speak as well just a little bit on the I suppose county councils and local authorities and their roles in terms of animal welfare, be it dog wardens or also looking after horses. We would have the horse fair in Ballinasloe, and again there's an awful lot done there in terms of animal welfare associations that are looking to ensure best practice and that we are looking after our horses and so on. But it's just really crucial that local authorities are given the support to make sure that they have those positions in place be it the dog warden, be it the person that's looking after wild horses, and how sometimes that delineation, as has been spoken about, is between the Gardaí, An Garda Síochána, and the local authorities. Does there need to be extra clarity there? And is there extra funding required for local authorities to be able to do that? The challenge we have in rural areas is that sometimes dogs are let roam, and there has to be a responsibility there for pet owners about how, that if you're living in areas, you can have built up estates right beside fields, to make sure that dogs are that there is a responsibility there for pets, and that there is microchipping, and that we are just knowing that it's not enough just to have a pet, that there is a huge level of responsibility in terms of managing that as well. And Gurmil Mahagat.
Seanad or Gerard Craughwell.
Look, at the outset, Minister, I want to thank Senator O'Reilly for bringing this motion here, but I'm quite devastated by what I just heard about Dublin Zoo. I mean, I think, Minister, the moment you leave here, you need to contact people and get them out there to see exactly what's going on. If even a tiny portion of what you're being told is true, that is outrageous. When I think of bringing my grandchildren and other people bringing their grandchildren out, and we thinking these animals are looked after better than any animal in the world, I'm totally devastated. But canine welfare is what I want to talk about. I've kept dogs all my life, right? Kept cockers for years, then moved on to Labradors and finally beagles. I moved away from cockers because of a condition known as cocker rage. And cocker rage apparently arises from inbreeding. And, when you go to purchase a dog, most of us that want to buy a dog and not rescue a dog, when you go, you usually find the little cardboard box in the corner with the puppies in the cardboard box, and everything looks hunky-dory. And then years later, you find out that this particular breeder was breeding maybe 100 bitches. And the little cardboard box was there purely for your visit and nothing else. But recently, my first beagle died, and my wife made a decision: we're never going to have a dog again. That's it. We're finished now. Not going through that again. And my grandkids said, no. If we get a dog, Nana will take the dog. So the hunt started for a beagle. And I invite you to look at dogs.ie, right? There's a bulldog there today for 2,000 quid. There's a Pomeranian there today for 1,650. There are beagles there for 1,000. There are German shepherds there for 600 to 2,000, depending on where you go. I bet £1 that nobody is paying any tax on this, for starters. Secondly, I will guarantee you quite a number of these are living in the most horrendous conditions. We were looking for this beagle. My son was relating to me the story behind the hunt for the beagle. Several phone calls were ended with, oh, well, it's not my own dog. I'm selling them for a friend. The other one was, sorry, the bitch is away being shown at the moment, so you can't see the bitch. No, we do, the male is not about, we don't. The worst one we had was 8 puppies down in the west for sale, and they were for sale at €1,600 each. They were the most beautiful looking dogs. I've no problem at all whatsoever there. The only thing is, the bitch and the father were not available and couldn't be seen because they were living with this guy's partner who was suffering from COVID-19. Now, I mean, 8 puppies at €1,650 each, that's a massive amount of money. To a certain degree, the Irish Kennel Club has a role to play here, because many of the breeders that I have met over time are people who show dogs at Irish Kennel Club events. And a very good friend of mine in the north of Ireland who is championed dogs, he is horrified by the number of dogs that are coming from the Republic through Northern Ireland to the UK, in the boots of cars, in all sorts of transportation. Now, I think my colleague Senator Boylan has a point here. I think breeders need to be registered. I think it needs to be formalised as a business. I think if you want to breed, you need to establish or register with your local authority that you are a breeder. And you need to have this up on your website. If you're selling an animal, you need to have a registered number as a breeder in order that people like me who want to buy a particular breed are able to check out your bona fides. The trouble we had, and not me particularly, but the trouble my family had in trying to get the latest dog we have, who's currently destroying my house, but that's another day's work. The trouble we had in establishing the bona fides of the breeder was absolutely almost insurmountable. And in the end of the day, we did find. But we are talking about a multi-million euro industry here in dogs. Now, very quickly on horses, at the end of the Celtic Tiger, we had lots of people bought horses who were going to turn into Arkle or Red Rum, and they thought, happy days. Suddenly, they weren't able to feed them, they didn't have the money. And I'm aware of one stable where people came and took the horses out of the stable, and the stable owner asked, the trainer, he said, where's the horse? Oh, I'm taking him down to a friend of mine in a farm. What they were actually doing was driving over west with a horse box, opening the horse box somewhere in Connemara, letting the horse out and driving away. And we had a county councillor in Ballina, I can't remember the man's name off the top of my head right now, but he used to drive around the country rescuing the horses. And he used to keep horses up in his place in Ballina, and his council payment he used to feed the horses. An amazing man. But these were horses that were sold for thousands of euros, and they were just dumped on the side of the road. So I think it's a massive problem. I'm still in shock over Dublin Zoo, I really am. I just can't get over that today. But I really thank Senator O'Reilly for bringing this here today. This is something that needs to be highlighted. We really do need to stop what's going on in the country. And if it's happening with dogs, what must the market be like for really exotic animals? So I leave it at that, Minister, and thank you for being here.
Anish on Ara.
Thank you, Cahir. I suppose firstly I want to begin by thanking my fellow Green Party senators for tabling this motion. I think it is timely, and I certainly want to extend my thanks to all members here who have spoken, passionately about this issue. It is important that we keep this on the agenda and high on the agenda. And certainly I'm pleased to welcome this motion on behalf of the government. And I'm particularly pleased that my cabinet colleagues decided this week to support the motion, really signalling this government's commitment to high standards of animal welfare in Ireland. Just maybe to, I suppose, to highlight that animal welfare doesn't fall under my particular remit. I'm here to represent Minister McConalogue, who's in the Dáil taking parliamentary questions. So I'm not sure if Senator Boyhan is aware of that or not, but I wasn't sure what the reference was to Minister McConalogue being the one to attend the committees. I've neither been asked to or I haven't declined, and if I were, I'd be more than happy to attend. I think the way we treat our animals reflects on us all, not only as a society but as a nation. And I think, look, we have no small reason in, actually, and I suppose I would like to welcome actually the proactive approach that seems to be taking place on the Ag Committee, and I thank Senator Boylan for highlighting that, and I hope that continues, because I think that's a channel by which we can hear from different perspectives, and it helps in terms of policy and government decisions. We have no small reason for pause in recent days to step back and reflect on the many achievements of this government over the past 2 years, and I am pleased with the progress my department has made in this most vital area of animal welfare policy since the government took office. And I think that has been recognised in this motion this morning. Senator Dolan actually highlighted the issue that, and it is an issue, I mean, animal welfare is spread across a number of departments, and I think sometimes clarity is needed as to which department, or if it's local authority, if it's veterinary officers across the country, who is responsible. I think even the public need to have clarity, and certainly sometimes politicians do too. So thank you for highlighting that. Animal welfare, we have made some significant progress in terms of programme for government delivery around animal welfare. And as members will recall, the Oireachtas legislated earlier this year to provide for a ban on fur farming. I know that is referenced in the motion. And I think, yes, the reference in relation to the commencement of that Act, I think it is something we will certainly be looking at. And I have been advised that the that negotiations with the affected farmers and the representatives are currently ongoing, and while the exact date from which fur farming will be permanently shut down has not been finalised, I am advised by my officials that this matter will be resolved in the coming weeks, such that a ban can come into effect. So hopefully we will have more news on that in the next couple of weeks. As Senator Murphy highlighted, my department has established a standalone animal welfare division for the first time. And in 2021 we did publish our first dedicated animal welfare strategy, working together for animal welfare 2021 to 2025. And I think that is significant, because up to now animal welfare and animal health were always sort of bunched in together, and it was about the health of the animal rather than the welfare. But we are clear now, we all know and recognise that animals are sentient. They do, you know, feel pain and distress and have happiness as well. So I think that this is a really positive move that we've made. Also, a new advisory council on companion animal welfare is up and running, and that will provide valuable advice on relevant policy issues in relation to companion animals. And later this year, and indeed last year, later this year will be the largest ever allocation of grants for animal welfare organisations. And that is essential to support these organisations in their vital work. I mean, unfortunately, they are necessary and still necessary, but look, we will support them as much as we can, and that was a important programme for government commitment to double that funding, and we will have achieved that by the end of the year. I mean, these are all real achievements that this government has brought about, and while it's important to reiterate our achievements in government here this morning, much like, I suppose, in the lower house earlier this week, we also need to recognise the vital work that remains to be done by this government and further progress that this government is committed to achieving over the coming years. Senators have called, and in fact, I think we're all quite shocked and stunned by Senator Hoey's account of what's happening in Dublin Zoo, and I think certainly I will bring that back to my department, and I will engage with Minister Noonan also, who I understand has the responsibility over zoos in that sense. So certainly I think, yeah, shocking stuff, and certainly something we will follow up on. I suppose in relation to zoos and exotic pets, you know, that is one of the calls in the motion about the putting regulations in place for the ownership, sale and supply of exotic pets. And I know that officials from my department have held interdepartmental meetings with colleagues from the National Parks and Wildlife Services to discuss and progress action on this issue. And I can assure the House that this is a matter that my officials will continue to progress with colleagues in the MPWS. Senator Boylan, you mentioned about the EU level and that Ireland, my notes say that Ireland indicated support in principle for submission to the European Commission in relation to those a potential legislative framework about positive listing. So hopefully there's a little bit more progress there than maybe indicated. And certainly my department is looking forward to examining the details of this idea along with our fellow member states as soon as those details are circulated. Yes, this morning motion also refers to the strategic plan of Rosia Con Éireann, or RCE, and I'm advised that the RCE recognises that its current strategic plan, 2018 to 2022, needs to be updated, and that the RCE has engaged with KPMG to progress this update. Officials from my department met with KPMG to provide input to the stakeholder consultation phase of the plan, and my officials will continue to engage actively on that review. With respect to the Pig Welfare Directive, and that was also referenced in the motion, my department has implemented a number of specific actions over the past 2 years to progress its full implementation. Since 2020, the department has been running a programme of pig welfare inspections aimed at identifying the risk factors for tail biting and giving pig farmers the opportunity to address them and then monitor progress towards rearing pigs with intact tails. This programme is an important step towards compliance with EU legislation on tail docking. To date, 138 commercial pig farms have been inspected and are engaging with the programme. This number is likely to increase in the coming months, as active participation in the programme is one of the eligibility criteria for farmers availing of the Pig Exceptional Payment Scheme 2, recently announced. In addition, the department has collaborated with the Animal Health Ireland and Teagasc to deliver a free tail-biting risk assessment tool for pig farmers. This is important as it enables farmers to work with their own veterinary practitioner to deal with the risk factors for tail biting on their farms. And since September 2021, the Board B Quality Assurance Scheme for pig producers requires farmers to complete that risk assessment, which has significantly increased engagement and uptake. Still in relation to pigs, in April 2022, my department launched a new targeted agricultural modernisation scheme for pig farmers. And this scheme offers farmers 40% co-funding up to the maximum investment ceiling of $200,000 towards new infrastructure for pig housing. The specifications of this scheme are specifically designed to deal with the main risk factors for tail biting, and my officials are confident that future housing constructed in line with these specifications will enable pigs to be reared in Ireland without the need for tail docking. Right, I've a few notes here. Let me just get this in some sort of order. Apologies. Yes, right. I want to reiterate my department's continued commitment to upholding high standards of animal welfare in the transport of live animals. And I know Senator Lombard and Senator Dolan have asked for clarity on figures. I don't have them with me, but whatever is up there on the department's website will be clear. And I do take the point that movement of animals from Ireland, Republic of Ireland to Northern Ireland is categorised as an export, so it is important to maybe break down those figures. And again, just to clarify, around say unweaned calves, for instance, they tend to be exported within the EU. It'll be older animals that might go beyond the EU. And then, to be fair to the motion and the Greens for putting it together, the motion does refer to exports outside the EU, and the requirement for a vet on board, which is a programme for government commitment, hasn't quite been achieved. Yes, there has been 1 or 2 vets on consignments, but not where it should be. So I know it is something that the senators and certainly my own fellow senators speak passionately about on this subject. And I would like to reassure the House of the Department's commitment that the Government will introduce legislation to provide a legal basis which will require exporters shipping livestock on dedicated livestock vessels to third countries outside the EU to place a vet on board. And my officials are currently working on a legislative proposal to this effect. And certainly another issue which has come up of late and not directly related in the motion, but the matter of shipments in summer months in extreme temperatures has also, it has been highlighted. And I can again assure the House that this is a priority of my department, that any legislative proposals to provide a legal basis for not only the veterinary presence on board, but also to maybe proposals to provide a basis for the prevention of shipments of live animals through areas during periods of high temperatures. That is extremely distressing for those animals, and it is something we have in the past addressed, and I think we just need to keep looking at that. Senator Craughwell spoke, in great detail and knowledge about dogs, and certainly it's something that crops up, and I know Senator Boylan talks about dog welfare also. Look, the Dog Breeding Establishments Act is there to regulate the operation of breeding establishments, but I think there are concerns as to how that is enforced and what is actually coming out of that. So we do need to keep that in mind. I think breeding issues are a concern for many. With dogs, whether it's from inbreeding or whether it's from breeding for particular desired traits, and then there are undesirable traits, or traits that actually damage the welfare of those animals. And we see the issue with pugs, for example, and that there is a huge emphasis on that. And it's important to keep those issues to the top of the agenda also. And I might just add in as well, it's not always about buying dogs. We can also plenty of dogs to be adopted and rehomed from the many hard-working animal welfare organisations around the country. And I'm glad to say my house is filled with dogs and cats from goodness knows where. So, but they're great. And everyone says, oh well, you're not going to change the world, by adopting a dog or a cat, but you change the world for that dog or cat. So I can highly recommend it. Anyway, I'm going to finish on this just to thank again my fellow senators for their contributions to this morning's debate, for their support for the motion. It's good to have that strong message, I think, coming from the Seanad on this. And as I said, as we've heard, animals are sentient beings. They can perceive their environment. They can experience sensations such as pain, suffering, pleasure and comfort. And as Ireland's animal welfare strategy recognises, human health and animal health are interdependent, and they're bound to the health of the ecosystems in which they exist. So our animals' health, the environments they inhabit and how they adapt to those environments and the degree of social interactions they experience have profound effects on their welfare and more broadly and also impact on society beyond the animals themselves. So I'm delighted therefore to say on behalf of my Cabinet colleagues that the Government supports the motion before the House this morning. Thank you.
Gerard, if I can ask the proposer, you have 5 minutes. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I'm not going to hold him. Just to clarify and to back up what the Minister said, Minister McConaughey has stated that fur farming will be closed down. Negotiations are going out to fur farmers and the dates will be announced pretty shortly. Yes. So just to confirm what
Thank you very much, Senator Murphy.
Mr. McConaughey.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you very much, Noah, and I appreciate the comments from Senator Murphy. I'm just going to go back over and comment on the various points raised by senators, but just firstly to say I'm sure Mr McConaughey also recognises that it's important for us as the Green Party to use everything that we can in order to make sure that it's progressed the issue of fur farming, because it was critical to us entering government, and Minister McConaughey himself said that he wasn't going to enter negotiations on the floor of the Seanad because he wanted the bill to pass. Well, that also means that the bill needs to be commenced, because it's pointless passing a bill and us putting extreme pressure on our government colleagues in order to get that passed. I have to say, it wasn't an easy time, and then to find that it's not commenced is quite difficult for us. And I am delighted to know that Minister McConaughey will do this within the next couple of weeks, but I will be looking at this throughout the summer to make sure that it actually happens. Look, I think that an awful lot of work is happening in relation to animal welfare behind the scenes, and Minister Hackett, you've laid all of that out. There have been a number of particular things that have been brought up by the House today, and I'm delighted to have been able to table this motion in order to facilitate senators in doing that, because it's critically important. Firstly, in relation to dogs, and as I've said to Senator Boylan, we were delighted to put in this part and your own bill into our motion, and you've asked to work together. I'm more than happy to work together on issues in relation to dog welfare in particular. Senator Craughwell spoke really passionately about this issue and has, as the Minister said, a lot of experience in this, and it does bring to light, I think a lot of people don't realise that it's really hard to enforce some of the elements that are already legislated for, and that means that we need more legislation in this area, and it means we need more enforcement in this area, and I'm happy to progress that. In relation to Senator Boyhan's comments that vets might be too expensive for the state to put on board all ships. Well, sorry, but that's the job of the exporter to pay for that, and if you can't afford it, don't export. And I've put in particularly the issue around exotic pets, because I think it's an important one for biodiversity. But let's make absolutely clear, every animal is equal. Every animal is equal. Be that an unweaned calf going to Europe, which predominantly they are going to Europe, but why are we sending unweaned calves to Europe? We don't believe that they should be, in the Green Party, sent anywhere. Why don't they stay at home? And we progress other avenues for these animals, and that they, at the very least, could be weaned before being sent anywhere. So that, I just really firmly believe that point is important to stress. And Senator, and I'm not trying to pick on you, Senator Boyhan, but you did mention that we have to balance it. We have to balance economy. Well, actually, there's very little money coming to any farmer in this state from any type of export, wherever it is. And it's not the case, and the animal welfare organisations will say this, and I particularly point out Ethical Farming Ireland, that it's not holding the farming industry together at live export. That it's not the case to say that. So we can't put money over the welfare of animals. Never. We can never do that. We have to, and this is why the motion specifically mentions this, we have to put welfare first. We have to have vets on board of every ship, no matter what it costs. I would also like to just say that I appreciate the comments by Senator Murphy and also by Senator Lombard there, and by Senator Dolan as well, who is now sitting in the chair. Thank you, Senator. That we do need to support farmers in this country. I think everything we've done is about supporting farmers in this country, and that's why we have specifically excluded that element from our, that is, you know, it is Green Party policy that we end live export. But it's not just about pragmatism. I mean, most of the people across this chamber, be they opposition or be they government, don't support ending live export. We have to do what we can, where we can, for the welfare of these animals. I would also like to thank Senator Hoey for raising the issue around Dublin Zoo. You know, it's a matter of grave concern that any animals are treated in this way, be they domestic, be they for export for farming, or be they exotic animals, and a proper investigation is required. So look, I suppose in conclusion, just to say, I'm glad that these issues have been supported by government. I'm glad that we can continue to support all of these organisations that are doing immense work. A lot of the issues raised today are around dogs, and I think that really is a testament to what Irish people feel about animals. And they're the animals that most people in the country know best, and they are shocked when they hear of mistreatment. Madra is a fantastic organisation in Galway, and an awful lot of people in Galway, that's where they go when they want to get their dogs and to rehome them, as Minister Hackett says. And what a wonderful experience for children to actually be in contact with animals, because what we often say it about nature and the environment, really you can't foster a love for the environment unless you are surrounded by it and unless you know it and feel it in your daily lives. And that's the same for animals. But let's make sure that we're doing it properly. Nobody needs to go to a website to buy a dog from a breeder when they don't know what the background is. There are an awful lot of animals that are crying out for love, and I would implore people to go first to organisations like Madra if that's what you're looking for your children. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the proposer, and yes, thank you for your comments. I suppose maybe some of the Marts and farmers might disagree just in terms of the income maybe coming from live export side of things, but
you are supposed to be neutral in this, and with all due respect, thank
you,
and I would disagree with you on that point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I suppose just to comment on Madra, I would very much agree with you, I suppose, just on Madra. I think it is fantastic. You always see in Galway Advertiser, I suppose, the little stories there on pets. I want to thank all senators, and especially Senator Hoey as well, I suppose, for contributions. So can I ask, is the motion agreed to? Agreed. So I think the question is carried. Can I ask then the Leader of the House to propose the suspension of the sitting until 11:30 a.m?
I propose suspension until 11:30.
Gerard, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Great, thank you.